Whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, our film is going to be called Deduction. It's a psychological crime thriller. It's about a new detective. He's like loving life. He's, he's a newbie. He's just working hard. And then these terrible crimes start happening. There's a criminal around, destroying everything in his path, and it leads to the detective making harsh decisions.
He's landed himself his dream job as becoming a new detective, and there's no cases he hasn't solved until now.
Strange murders and crimes begin to unfold, and it's up to Parks to crack the case. Each case seems to get more difficult to understand and decipher, which leads to Parks growing frustrated, causing his relationship with partner Hope to deteriorate.
It's going to be based in 2 settings, and our opening title sequence is going to start with shots of a dead body, and the camera's going to focus on certain features, and the detective is just going to be looking at the dead body and finding out what's happened, and then it's going to flash back to when this victim was alive, and the camera's going to focus on the same features, and then it's going to go back to the crime scene, and the detective rolls over the body, and his reaction hints that he knows them.
The film opens with a non-linear narrative opening title sequence. It starts with the girl dead on the floor. Detective Parks is examining the body. There are various close-ups of things like painted nails or a bag, as if someone was taking a picture. The camera then flashes into flashbacks to the same woman a few hours earlier, but walking down the street. The camera shows the same item shown earlier, but before her death. She walks nervously for a bit, and the camera flashes back again to someone planning the murder. You never see his face, as the room is dark and all the shots are over the shoulder. We then flash forward to the girl walking. A man steps out from the side passage from behind her. You can see a weapon in his hand. The camera then suddenly flashes forward again to the crime scene. The detective rolls over the body and steps back in shock, until he recognises the body. The protagonist is called Detective John Parks. He's 28, white, working/middle class, and his backstory is that he comes from a poor family with no siblings to share childhood with. His parents had to work in order to give Parks a good upbringing, making Parks very independent. He suffers from asthma, which may or may not be a weakness of his. Furthermore, Parks tended to play cops and robbers with his friends as a child. He enjoyed the thrill of the chase. His life was absorbed into crime and justice, which is why he wanted to become a detective. Moreover, he met his true love, Hope, that he soon married at the age of 22. His marriage was a year after joining the police force. After a string of successful cases, Parks was promoted to detective at the age of 26. He's a very popular human being amongst everyone he's surrounded with. He has a cheerful spirit and is very hard-working when it comes down to his career as a detective. Even when things get tough, he remains calm to not lose control. The antagonist is called Arthur Woods. He's 30, white, male, upper class, and is a criminal mastermind. He comes from a fairly rich background, has an older sister who always believed and took advantage of him. His father abused him at a young age, and his mother never believed after that it happened. He always felt like an outsider, and even though he was fairly rich, he went to the same school as Parks and Hope. He adored Hope while they were at school together. At the age of 18, he finally snapped and killed his mother and sister. He pleaded insane and was sent to a mental asylum, which he broke out of 6 years later. During his stay, he developed an obsession with Hope. He has a very short temper, hates rudeness and not getting in his own way. He is psychopathic but very clever and has almost a complete lack of empathy. He would always be a step ahead of everything and knows how to get into people's heads.
is 27 and she's a female, and she's of the working middle class, and she's a doctor. She's from a wealthier family than Parks and has loved to help people. And when she was at school, she met John Parks, who's a detective, and after Parks got the job with the police force, he proposed her and they got married.
Soon after this, Hope graduated from medical school, trained to become a doctor. By the age of 25, she became a fully trained doctor. She usually works in like the A&E department, very like people with most risk. Her personality, very focused. She's not really affected by gore. She's good in any situation, and she's very caring. Okay, for the locations, we discussed a few places. We thought they need to be somewhere ordinary, so because thrillers usually are in ordinary places. Inspired by Sin City, there's like a huge shooting scene in just an ordinary street, so we thought it could be in just an abandoned street. We also thought about wooded areas, but it'd be quite dark there. And also got a street view from Google Maps of behind a car park, so that would be a pretty good place to film because there's not really many people around there. For the costumes for Detective Parks, we talked about a trench coat or a smart suit. They're very common in thrillers. I think the smart suit would be most suited because trench coats are usually in like the very old-fashioned films. For the antagonist, he should also be wearing very expensive clothing, but then there should be something distinct about him, so like a scar or some sort of jewellery that he wears to help create the fear of him. And then for the makeup, we decided the hero should be very natural looking, so he just looks like everybody else, just an ordinary guy. And the villain should be very pale. You know, he stands out from the crowd, and you know, people are like aware of his presence.
For the props, we're going to have like, well, we might have small knives, and we're going to have something significant to the rest of the plot, so it like stands out. And then for the villain, we're going to see him with like loads of photos and scratching up the main image. And the lighting, we were influenced by brick, so we're going to have it dark with a blue tint to create the eerie atmosphere, which will match the action of our opening title sequence.
That's what we came up with. Hope you enjoyed our presentation.
Well done, wait for a bit of feedback. So, what is working well in their idea? Think the whole film, the actual opening title sequence, or any conventions they've used?
They've kept it really like down to the third genre, like really kept everything they've put into it really typical of it.
Really good, typical use of genre conventions. Yep. Anything else that you think in particular is working well?
You guys have like thought of everything. Like there's nothing you guys aren't really sure about.
So quite thoughtful
Yeah, you
and
considered
detailed.
everything.
Any questions that we might have, or any suggestions, any gaps in what they've told us? Can you visualise the opening title sequence? Do you need more information about that? I have a few questions. I think one of them was, what lighting effect were you aiming for in the opening title sequence, but I think you eventually answered that with your mise-en-scène. How are you going to differentiate between present and past, or with your flashback? What sort of effect?
Could use like a caption, like a few hours later or a few hours earlier, something like that, because that's quite common in thrillers.
Okay. Or lighting, or...
It could be different, like when it's a flashback to when she gets murdered, it could be very dark, but then, or light, because she's still alive, and then when it flashes back to the actual death of her, it could be very dark lighting to like sort of suggest her death.
Okay. You mentioned that to show consistency or continuation between those, you're going to be using objects which create a graphic match. Is that correct?
Objects of graphic.
Like the bracelets in.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the film Brick, where you see the bracelet and you see in the flashback she's still wearing it and things like that.
Who is going to be the victim in that opening title sequence? Is it Hope? Because that's what I was wondering.
Well, that's
is
the
it his
thing.
wife?
In our opening, he's going to turn over the body and sort of like react to it. So it could be someone that she knows that's very similar to her, or it could be a sister, things like that. But it keeps the whole audience questioning who it is.
Okay.
So I don't think it would be Hope.
Okay.
It's too early for her death yet.
Okay. So she is going to die during the
Possibly.
film.
Possibly. Depends how far the villain goes.
Okay. One last thing. Oh no, there's one more thing. Casting for your detective and your antagonist. You've got middle-aged or
Yeah.
20-something plus people.
Well,
How are you going to? Are you cast it or costume
you're not going
for
to
it?
see like the villain's face.
Yeah.
So it won't
And
be
plus
like
the body
seeing
will be turned over on her back, like very uncomfortable position. The detective could be done with makeup, like the way he sort of stood. Like maybe my brother could do it because he's that sort of age. So
Okay.
anyone really.
Any other questions that maybe popped up in your mind or suggestions?
Where did you get your ideas from?
There's a few films we looked at. Like Seven is probably the main one. For the opening is Brick, and then like the sort of settings is kind of inspired by like Sin City or places like that.
And one last thing
Oh,
from
sorry.
me. Oh, somebody
What's
behind
the
me.
name of the film?
Deduction.
Deduction. That's one thing that I didn't catch it. Yeah. So implying the detective role. Okay. Thank you very much. Well done.